You could be aggressive about it. You could be, oh, well, I only want these commands, or I want only white hulls. I don't want black hulls or red hulls, or I want to do some law enforcement. Or you can be passive about it and say, hey, guess what? I'm going to have 5 ships in my career. I will take any ship the service gives me.
Yeah.
Let's roll. So that's one way of looking at it. So stance is not something we really talk a lot about because we think, you got to be hard charger. But then it becomes the whole ladder against the wall thing. If it's you and somebody else, you're both going to get the ladder, but is the ladder against the right wall? And are you climbing that ladder at a pace that you can sustain and that you're comfortable with, that you're happy with? The hard chargers who want to be flag officers, general officers, are happy with the pace they're at to be flag officers, general officers. Don't compare yourself against them. Just don't.
Gotcha.
Because that's not where your aggression lies if you don't want to be one of them.
Yeah.
So, it's something I've been mulling over because I want to make sure passive is not being a pushover and that passive is not being non-active. It's just, for me, I think when you take a passive stance, your decision threshold is much higher. Whereas if you take an aggressive stance, and both stances work, I think your decision threshold is a little lower. And I think the level of decision making you take on an aggressive stance is probably more detailed. There's nothing wrong with either one. They both work.
Yeah.
But it's the question of what how do you feel?
I guess it really also correlates well with if you're not, how do I word this? Because I want to talk about the dip, right? And the dip, I asked you what it was offline, but I want to kind of correlate this because if you have this stance, right, where it's, you're kind of saying, I don't want to say stay in your lane, but really understand your lane, right, is more, okay. And so with people who are more passive and they're not, and again, I respect the process of not using passive as a negative term. It can affect, right? We can say that being a little standoffish, I don't even know if that's the word, being a little passive or passive aggressive, at least, in knowing your stance and not seeing the process that you have intended, to kind of sum up more of the book. Once you're doing all this work and you're not seeing you're not reaping what you seem to have sowed, right? You get into this funk, and you wrote about it, the dip. Can you talk about the dip? I mean, does that correlate well? Did I tie that in well? How you intended the process of, the ups and downs? Maybe not. I mean, you can explain it. Believe me. Like I said, utilize this time to correct me or, set it all straight. But, because you explained the dip as kind of like a low before the high, right?
Yes. For me, the dip. So let me give an example, and I'm going to use Donald Trump as an example, because I haven't talked about him at all yet, and it's going to be a great example. Here it comes. I learned from an 06 who was on the fast track, who recently retired by his own choice, that in D.C., in Washington, there are these two islands of administration, these two islands of performance. There is the island of campaigning and the island of governance. And, he foretold this 4 years ago, and it makes so much sense now. When you're on the island of campaigning, you can say anything you want.
Okay.
And if you look at, you can say anything you want. You can say it all, because you are not in the throne. You do not have the seat of power. You're campaigning. Your job is to win votes. And that relates to Scott Adams and his analysis of Donald Trump. Scott Adams, the cartoonist of Dilbert, predicted in September of 2015, not 2 months ago, a year and 2 months ago, that Trump would win because Trump was a master persuader, because Trump mastered the art of the campaign. Now, do I agree with most of what he says? Absolutely not. Do I agree with the wall? I do not agree with the wall. But the way he was able to persuade and the way he was able to engage a population to get him 300 electoral votes shows that he's effective at the art of the campaign. But campaigning is not governance.
Yeah.
So Trump says he'll repeal Obamacare, but once you go into governance, can you really appeal Obamacare? It's already been to the Supreme Court once and upheld. Can you really do it? And I would say probably not. I would say 2/3 of Trump's promises cannot come to fruition because he is now governing the country, and there are a whole lot of other priorities. He doesn't control Congress. He doesn't control the judiciary. He is able to put some votes into the Supreme Court, but he does not control the Supreme Court. The world changes. And the people he was never able to appease in governance will not be with him for the next campaign. It's the same thing with the military on campaign and in garrison. The military at expedition is a much different military, whether it's something as minuscule as regulatory standards for uniform standards, or whether it's something as broad as in the shift from the great power battle of World War II to the counterinsurgency of today. So you take that military in campaign and you put that military in campaign back into garrison. Well, then the questions come out. Do you need a 500,000 member standing military force? You're not on campaign anymore. You're in garrison. Maybe you need a smaller force. And the America has always fought with this idea of, in garrison, how many soldiers and ships do we need? You know, right now, the Navy's talking about having a 355 ship Navy. We were saying 600 ships 30 years ago. What's changed? Fall of Russia. The change in the global environment. So maybe 600 ships in the era of Reagan would be excessive in the era of Trump. So the dip to me is that shift between one way of doing business and another way of doing business. The dip to me is who we are in the uniform and who we are after the uniform. Because this world inside the uniform, it's its own different thing. And in the volunteer force that we have, we will continue to have fewer and fewer people choosing to serve just per capita by the nature of the growth of the populace, which means that disconnect between military and civilian is only going to grow over time. So we know this. We understand this brotherhood, this sisterhood, this comrade, this community of arms. We get this. We know this. Whether it's 5 years, 10, or more, we are comfortable with this. The dip becomes when that Monday after you realize, or EAS, like you said, no, reveille. Or like your argument, your story was about lunch. Hey, no one tells me when to go lunch anymore. Like something that small, it's a chuckler, but something that small is indicative of the diversity and the dissonance between a military culture and civilian culture. And it's even more dissonant when you think about, wait a minute, I can start my own business. I could be a franchise. I could run a search fund. I could be a venture capital guy. I could be an employee. Like, we're not even talking about skills. We're talking about ways to promote your skills. You could be a freelancer. You could be a contractor. You could be a GS. Like, all that's not even on the table when you're in the military. In the military, you have E4, E5, E6, E7, E8, W's, and O's. Like, that's it. Whereas on the outside, or I hate saying outside, but after the uniform, whoa, you could be a contractor for a few years with General Dynamics. You could be a GS for NSA for a couple of years. You could work for Agilent. You could work for Stratfor. You could work in Council of Foreign Relations. Like, there's just, the dip comes to us when we see the magnanimity of choices that we had that we've never had to have before ever in our working lives.
Yeah. That's
what the dip is. The dip is, all right, I can do anything. And not anything in some like pejorative sense, but literally I can fulfill my skill set in a dozen different ways, all of them I've never seen in uniform.
man, it's funny because there's so much to transitioning, right? There's so much to look at externally as well as internally, because you have to see what's going. I mean, you have to keep an eye on what's going on in the government, right?
Mm-hmm.
And definitely kind of mold, I guess, your outside personality or your outside lifestyle to what's going to make you most happy and most successful at the same time. And, you know, if your mindset is on getting rich, you have to understand what's going on in the country. And if your mindset's on
Mm-hmm.
healing the world, you have to understand what's going on in the country. And so there's a lot of all of that. You know, I don't write about a lot of that. So the fact that you're talking about that and coming at it from a different approach is why I'm not shying away from having another transition coach on the podcast with me, because there's so many things that go. I mean, if you were to write one big transition book, it would be a really big book and it'd be kind of confusing, you know, like,
Mm-hmm.
because there's so many elements to it. And so I appreciate that you're here talking about that. And I never had actually sat there and thought about that process. But there's like two more things I kind of want to touch on. I know I've had you for a long time, but one thing is treating transition as a part-time job. I want to talk about that. Like, you're in right now and you know better than anybody on how much time you should and shouldn't allot to transitioning, and how soon you should be thinking about it. Because I couldn't wait to get out. I didn't treat the taps and time as well as I should have, and I know a lot of people aren't. But being that you develop this process from within, you have a better insight on how long or how soon is too soon, I guess would be a better way of saying that, and how in the present is not soon enough. And then also, sorry to add to that, like, who else should you be kind of tapping into while you're in, right? For both enlisted and officer.
I don't think it's ever too soon to consider transition at all.
On the footprints.
I honestly don't think it's too soon. What's that?
I said on the footprints.
Yeah, absolutely. Fuck yeah. Fuck yeah on the footprint. I mean, think about it. So, let's look at the special war. Let's look at the special force community. You know, the people who ring the bell are the people who lose focus on the goal. And the immediate goal is to get your pin, is to get your tab. You know, we know when we sign up, we're signing up for 4 to 6 years. We know that's up front. That's the beginning. But I'm not saying while you're on deployment, think about getting out. But what I say is, when you're in garrison, when you're in home port, that's the time to think about, what from this experience can I take with me? In every year you serve, you should have one story that would define who you want to be after you get out. So in 20 years, I should have 20 stories, but I shouldn't be having. I shouldn't have to go back 20 years to find those first 3 stories. I should have one story a year.
Yeah.
So I'm not saying devote a day a month, but I do think it's iterative. I think if you genuinely craft your network now, because, you know, here's the thing. In the military, if you want to make 06, you start your first assignment, period.
Okay.
I'll use my personal example. My 05, my commanding officer made 06 in my first assignment, and I didn't realize it, but my commanding officer was connected to one of our commandants because they had known each other since he was a cadet at the academy. So, yeah, you start transition the same way you would start if you want to strive for being a flag officer, general officer. You start early. You start as soon as possible. People decide they want to go special warfare. They decide as soon as possible. And they align their career to give them the best opportunity to not have to ring the bell and to complete whatever basic special warfare training there is that you could choose from. Like, you do that. You know, if you want to be an 06 colonel in the Army, you're going to Ranger School as soon as possible.
Yeah.
You're going to get probably a mountain tab or an SF tab on top of that. If you want to be in '06 in the Marine Corps, you